Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us for tonight's program. I am Young Park. I'm an other services librarian at the Chicago Public Library. Tonight's program is one of the 2021 One Book on Chicago season. This year marked the 20th season of One Book on Chicago, a citywide book club that brought residents together over a common book and theme. This year's selection is Bedrock Face by Eric Charles May. Bedrock Face tells a story of a Chicago neighborhood that is familiar to many of us and emphasizes the need the neighbors to come together to support each other. Please visit onebookonechicago.org to join One Book One Chicago discussions, events, and programs. Tonight, we are pleased to welcome our special guest, Chef Beverly Kim, to the program Korean Cooking in Chicago. Chef Beverly Kim is a James Beard award-winning chef and the owner of Parachute Restaurant and the Where With All restaurants. Audience members can post your questions to Beverly Kim on the chat box, which is located to the right side of your screen. Then Chef Beverly will reply after the program. Thank you for the CTL Foundation and supporters for making the One Book One Chicago 2021 season. And this program is co-sponsored by the Asian American and Pacific Islanders Committee of CPL. Thank you for making this program possible. Please join me in welcoming Chef Beverly Kim to the CPL virtual stage.
Thanks for having me.
Hi, welcome, Beverly. We have been suffering a worldwide crisis under the pandemic. How did the pandemic affect you, your family, and your businesses?
The pandemic was extremely, I would say, traumatic of an experience for my family. We are solely restaurant owners, and come March 15th, we had no idea of how long a shutdown would occur, and our only source of income was through restaurants. So we were definitely under a lot of emotional and financial stress throughout the pandemic. Also, I lost my grandmother in May of 2020 due to COVID. And it was extremely painful to have lost her and not have had been there in her hospital room because of COVID restrictions. Although she was 99 and she lived a long life, it was just very tragic that we couldn't celebrate the way we wanted to with all the family together. So it was a series of tragedies, but also a lot of unveiling of inequities in our own communities. And the silver lining is that we can't ever look at those inequities the same and without addressing them. And a lot of the positive things in terms of how we've come together as community has changed completely because of the pandemic. However, it was at the cost of lives and people losing their jobs, and it was quite a tragedy to live through.
Yeah, it was. I'm so sorry to hear of your loss. Yeah. Okay, even during the pandemic, you did not stop engaging community. I was told so many good things about what you did for the community, including the Did You Eat campaign with the Hano Family Alliance. So could you share stories about the Hano's Did You Eat 밥 먹었어요 program, please?
Yeah, sure. So during the shutdown, I think many people were affected, especially the senior citizens in our communities. They were forced to be isolated. They were scared for their life. And Hano Family Alliance is a nonprofit organization which supports the senior citizens in the Korean American community in Chicago. And their services such as lunch meals and activities like such as English, all those things had to kind of sort of shut down because of the COVID restrictions. However, one way that I got involved with Hano was by receiving grants from partners such as Lee Initiative, Raise High Roads, Community Canteen and Kitchen, and use those grants to allot for Korean style meals that we sent to Hano Family, to their homebound seniors, because normally they would have been able to have access to these meals, like 5 meals a week, and it was down to 2 meals or 3 meals a week. And so our additional meals bumped up their meals, as well as just like the importance of reaching out and to know that other people care about them and to know that they're not alone. And so this was nice to receive food from an outside source that that they got excited about, and it was stimulating for them, but mostly pointing to the fact that their services were so much needed during this time. Senior citizens were extremely lonely, extremely isolated throughout this pandemic, and we were able to help them through our food services.
Thank you so much. Yeah, you are an influential Korean American as a James Beard Award-winning chef and a successful owner of the 2 successful restaurants, Parachute and then Wherewithal. So how and why do you keep Korean heritage, culture, and taste in your cooking?
Well, I can't deny how much a part of Korean food is me, as part of my identity. Growing up in Downers Grove, Illinois, I was born here in America. However, my parents were immigrated from South Korea. They brought with them the culture, the values, but also the food. And I think that for me, the way I received love and interpreted love and was communicated love was through food. My mom always had so many delicious food ready for me when I was coming home from school. Food was such an important part of our family. It was the way we gathered together. We always said a prayer of thankfulness. It was a moment when, despite of all the stresses of life and the stress of having 2 cultures, and being an immigrant family, we could put all that stress aside and focus on enjoying really good food. Like my mom was an amazing cook, and we actually had 3 refrigerators at home. One was for kimchi, one was for our daily meals, and one was for long preserving things like dried fish and soy sauce. And I remember my mom was always cooking, always around, like cleaning, cooking. And so I was the 4th of the 4 daughters in my family. And I was like the sous chef for my mom. And so that's how I really got involved with cooking. But my true love, like when I talk about comfort food, for me, it's Korean food. So when I went to culinary school, I learned about, European style cooking and other kind of cooking, and exposed myself to the, different cuisines. However, I will always have my home base and love for Korean food. That's what I was nurtured on. And one of my earliest memories was eating kimchi, or the garlic stems, really spicy garlic stems. And I was sitting on my mom's lap. So I must have been no older than 3 or 4 years old.
Wow.
And enjoying, the spicy, sweet pickle of garlic stems, sitting on her lap with some hot rice mixed with hot water, something so simple, but her feeding me was like, I just remember that moment of feeling bliss and joy. So like Korean food will always be part of my expression in my culinary what I see is it's a culinary is an art form. It's a way of expressing what's happening um, in pop culture and what's happening in the world. It's a way of expressing yourself, and so that's why Korean food will always be a part of that.
Yeah, you are not just starting from the your own feeling, but you try to keep that heritage and culture and taste with your staff as well. I remember that before the COVID, I watched the video clip that you have a trip to Korea with the whole your staff.
Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely. Yeah, I think to know where our roots come from and follow those roots back to the motherland of Korea, like where um, kind of the history and the context was also important for education for my staff and for myself to have that actual connection um, to why Koreans preserve the way they did, and why do they mix seafood with like meat things, and why do they have all these mountain vegetables and foraging techniques, and um, like to go to the base source was very invigorating, and how passionate Koreans are about food. Like it goes really deep in ancient culture. Um, and so amazing to think that like my parents grew up with no refrigerator, no microwaves, no modern conveniences, and yet were able to preserve food, was able to sustain themselves and nourish themselves, um, and have distinct flavors and traditions. It's so beautiful. It's so beautiful to like keep that heritage. It was brought to America and it is part of now the American culture.
Interesting. Thank you. And then how and when did you wanted to become a chef? Because in Korean community, I believe they was very hard to say to your parents, I wanted to be a chef because the Korean immigrant community, they value that lawyer or doctor as a good career to pursue, not as chef. So I'm very curious. So how and when did you want to become a chef? And also, did your parents and families support you during the past?
Yeah, so I'm going to preface to say that people change. So my dad, like who he was like 25 years ago, and the things he would say to me are much different today. But when I've been in this industry since I was 16. So how I entered this industry was because my older sister, who was 9 years older than me, already been to college, already had friends who worked in restaurants. I had a conversation with her on the phone. I was thinking about, oh, what should I apply to for college and what kind of major should I do? And she had mentioned, you would make an amazing chef because you're always in the kitchen and you just have a special relationship with food. And I said, I don't know like, there's nobody to talk to or mentored me about being a chef. So I went to Barnes and Noble and I bought a book called The Who's Who in America, and it was by the James Beard Foundation. I looked it up and I did my research. It was published in 1990, and it had all the chefs in Illinois and in Chicago who were recommended by James Beard Foundation. I wrote them letters, and of the chefs that I wrote letters to was Chef Sarah Stegner. Actually, it was actually a different chef. It was a male chef. She called me back. She said, he's no longer here, but if he was here, he would have wanted to probably talk to you. But I'm now the executive dining chef. And so what can I help you with? Well, how can I help you? So from there, I did a shadow at the Ritz-Carlton Hotel in Chicago. And from there, I persistently asked them until like were so annoyed by me till they said, okay, you can do an internship. So I did like a month intern during my summer of junior year. And then I solidified for myself that, yes, this is the career I want to do because every moment I was learning something, and every moment was not dull. You're on your feet, you're working with different ingredients, learning about different methods and techniques, and it was creative, it was beautiful. I felt like it was a great combination of everything that I I loved, which was art and math and science and adventure. Kind of a romantic person like that. I love learning and experiencing new things, and food was that. When I told my parents about going to culinary school, I'm the last of four daughters. So by that time, they had already spent a lot of money on college for the other sisters and already spending money on two weddings. And so my dad said, yeah, if you were my son, I'd kick your ass for going to culinary school. He's like, but since you're a girl, at least you could be a good wife, is what he said. And it's kind of but because Korean culture is kind of chauvinistic like that. But I think like at the time, yeah, Korean society looked down on the culinary arts because they saw it as something that was sort of like, it didn't have a high regard in terms of like, it was a lot of hard work, and it was kind of a low paying job, which is still true. It's a low paying job for most part. And like, and except for the very few celebrity chefs, that they get really, really big and they have a name behind them. But for the most part, it's a lot of hard work, and I think he wanted to protect me from a life of hard work and not making a good living. However, when I got my first executive chef position when I was 27, my father, he said to me, he said, maybe one of these days you can be one of the best chefs in the world. And when he said that to me, I was like, I needed a second to go to the office and lock the door, and I started crying because I always longed for my parents' approval. Oh, I mean, I think every child longs for belonging from their own parents and acceptance. And that was just like for the first time, he acknowledged that I achieved success through the culinary field.
Beautiful story. Thank you for sharing with us. Okay, I was so impressed by the Abundant Setting, a program that served working mothers in the culinary industry that you founded to support women in the hospitality and restaurant businesses. So would you share with us the story of Abundant Setting and how diversity, equity, and inclusion play a role?
Absolutely. So one of the things that I entered into culinary immediately noticed that there's so very few women executive chefs, head chefs. It was very few to have, very few and far between where you saw a restaurant led by a woman chef, which always leads you to wonder, like why? And also I was throughout my career challenged because some of the work environment is kind of like, not a safe necessarily and supportive environment for women. You hear a lot of men talking like a locker room talk, which in other words is misogyny, misogynistic kind of attitudes in the kitchen. So and finally, when I became a mother myself, it just seemed like everyone was like, you're going to give up your career at this point, right? And it was almost kind of like there was not very many options for me at that point. But I decided to continue despite how hard it was. So really systemically, why there's 54% women graduating from culinary schools and why there's only 6 to 7% women in leadership roles in independent restaurants is a myriad of factors, but a lot of it, when a woman decides to have a family, the support systems are completely lacking. The statistics show that women in the industry, in the culinary industry, spend anywhere from 35 to 50% of their income just on childcare alone. So it's not a sustainable thing for women. Oftentimes, especially women of color, they find it highly more affected in this industry when it comes to lack of childcare supports and resources. I also found it was very difficult to find support at nighttime. When I work at night was when we make the most money and when you're expected to work, and also weekends, Friday, Saturdays, and Sunday nights, where you're expected to work. So working in a countercultural industry, with countercultural hours in a very slim margin kind of industry, on top of the lack of support for working parents, it's no wonder why many women drop out. So the Abundance Setting is a nonprofit organization which I started during the pandemic to address a lot of the she-cession, so a recession of women coming out of the industry because of lack of childcare supports, addressing those kind of issues, and also just like are furthering the mission of more women in the leadership in the culinary industry is what we're here for. So because there's such few like support systems, we have to create in our community support systems through networking, through mentorship, through coaching, through we also started a meal relief program, which we provided family meals for the working moms in culinary to give them back some quality time at home, as well as education through the food. So yeah, we are at the very beginning in the seed of a very national problem, in global problem for women, that we don't have the supports in acknowledgement. If the world was and the policies were written by women, things would be much different. But unfortunately, policies and laws are written mostly by men. So yeah, it's just really important for us to address these issues in order for women to move forward. But also, for an industrial nation, America ranks like 35 out of 37 industrial nations in terms of their support in childcare supports and parental supports. For example, we don't have a national parental leave program. We don't have, adequate health care. We don't have adequate like childcare supports, and so when you look at all those things put together, we have to create the catalysm for change.
I could feel why people call you activist. Exactly. Thank you for sharing such an awesome story with us. Our audience is also very excited to see the cooking demo by you. So today, what will you cook for us?
So today I will be making a lobster sundubu jjigae. Sundubu jjigae is a Korean comfort food, but we're elevating it using lobster to just give it a little bit more of an interesting flair, making it a more special occasion dish.
Wow, cool. Let's see your demo.
I'm super excited to cook this lobster sundubu with you. And just a little bit about sundubu. It's one of those comfort foods every Korean family loves to eat. It's the texture. Usually it's done with shellfish. And for me to make it a little bit more fancy today and a little more special, we're using lobster. After you had roasted your heads in the oven for about 15 minutes at 400 degrees, we're gonna start our stock, which is the base of this dish, like developing a lot of flavor into the soup broth. All right, so I have a pot here and I am putting it on medium to medium-high heat just to kind of get it going, but not smoking hot. We're gonna use sesame oil. You should have this in your container. It's a mixture of sesame oil and canola oil, just to give it a little bit of flavor and aroma. Koreans love sesame oil. And then I'm gonna throw in my aromatics. So in my aromatics kits, we have ginger, garlic, onions, which give it kind of like that base Korean flavor. I'm gonna turn this down just a little bit. It's a little bit high. And I also have carrots, which add a little bit of sweetness, and so I would call this sort of like your base of your stock. So you kind of have to be a little bit patient, keep stirring it now and then so it doesn't burn. You don't want it to really burn. You want it just to have a nice kind of golden color around the edges, and also kind of like soften your onions and they'll start to turn translucent. So all that like depth of flavor is from the basis of your stock broth. And this is a little bit different than a typical Korean stock, because typical Korean stock is a little bit lighter, but the sundubu broth is kind of a little deeper. So that's kind of what I'm demonstrating here. While this is sauteing, I'm going to explain a little bit about the Kombu stock. So this is kelp that's been soaked in at least like an hour, or you could do this up to 3 hours. But we already soaked it for you for sake of time. We threw also a dry shiitake mushroom in there, and that's going to develop like that umami flavor. So a lot of Korean dishes have umami, which is that deep savory flavor, but it's light at the same time. And also a little bit kind of stemming from the kind of classical French technique, we're going to deglaze these aromatics with part white wine and sake. So it'll have a little bit more depth to it when you add the wine flavor. In the meantime, what we've prepped for you as well that is going to go into your stock is some anchovies, dried Korean anchovies, which we call myeolchi. And this also builds off that deep umami flavor. We take the heads and the guts out just to take a little bit of that bitterness off, and it's a little more refined, less fishy flavor. And there's also some whole chilies and some whole scallions. So after your vegetables are sauteed and there's a little caramel, you're going to add your spice mix, which is gochugaru, both fine and coarse, and gochujang. And you're going to try to saute that to bring out the oils of the chili flake. So I'm going to now add my wine and sake. Now you can kind of bring up to a medium-high heat, because what you're trying to do is evaporate the alcohol but leave the essence of the wine and the sake in there, which is gonna make a nice base for your stock. So give it a few more minutes to deglaze. If you add your stock in now, it's going to have a little bit of like an overly acrid taste, which comes from not evaporating the alcohol out. So you need to be patient with the process. Yeah, a lot about cooking is just being patient. Like, it's not hard, it's just being patient. So you can see that it's still got a ways to go, so be a little patient, because this is like literally just like building the flavor. So right now I'm smelling a mix of onion and garlic flavors, some vegetal flavors in the air, like the allium, that kind of caramelized sweetness of the garlic, and then the wine evaporating into the air. I can smell that coming together. This is when you're supposed to be drinking wine at the same time as cooking. Anticipating, you pour in a little wine there and you drink a little wine here. Makes it really more fun. All right, so you see that beautiful like reduction, it's getting a little thicker. So now I'm going to add my kombu water with the shiitake mushroom. So I would say this has been about like 10 minutes into, like, you've sweated the vegetables, you've reduced, you added the gochugaru and gave it a stir for a few more minutes. When you add the gochugaru, I definitely wouldn't leave because it will burn. So I would just keep stirring it until you can sort of like smell some of the roastedness of it. You don't want to burn it. And you can also see that it's starting to caramelize a little bit and get darker. And then we reduced the wine, and that took a few more minutes to reduce the wine, and it's probably been about 10 minutes. And so now I add the stock, and you can see it, like the color too, it's kind of red. And some of that oil with the chili flake will rise to the top. And one of my favorite things is seeing that little layer of chili oil on the top of the sundubu is kind of like very delicious. It makes my mouth water. So you'll see that like it'll kind of bring it all together and rise to the top, and then it'll simmer and marry all those flavors, and all those molecules are kind of marrying in a sense, and to give that really good base of the broth. Oh, I'm sorry, one more thing. Don't forget this. Now you want to add your anchovies and scallions and chili, and also most importantly, you're going to add the roasted lobster head. So this is going to give that lobster broth flavor. And then bring it to a boil, and then to a simmer. You don't want it to boil constantly, but you do want to first get it to a boil to get it hot enough where it's extracting as much flavor as possible. And then we're gonna let it simmer for about an hour on medium-low heat to an hour and a half. All right. So after about an hour to an hour and a half of slow simmering, your stock will look more reduced and kind of slightly thicker, but you don't want it to be dry. I kind of smashed the lobster heads around a little bit just to get some of that flavor in, and then just kind of strain it through a fine chinois, we call it, or fine strainer. And then just gently push all that flavor out. So you should get about at least 2 cups of liquid. Right, and then just to give it some more flavor and depth, because there's really no salinity right now, we're gonna put the fish sauce and this white soy sauce, which gives it more of a deeper flavor, the je ne sais quoi. And then when you're ready to serve, Koreans use like a nice ceramic pot, or in this case I'm using this really cool iron pot, but something like a smaller pot if you don't have a Korean dukbaegi, something that you're gonna go from heating it up to serving. So we're gonna eat directly out of this bowl. I'm gonna put the stock in this pot about a cup's worth, you know. Oh, it's already coming to a boil. Wow, this is very fast. So let's bring this down a little bit. We're gonna throw in this. This is sundubu. It's a very soft tofu. This is ready when you're ready to serve, basically. I'm gonna put this. It's almost like an egg custardy texture. And now we're gonna throw in the meat. I'm leaving some of the nicer pieces for the presentation. Throw in your mushrooms, chilies, and let it come to a full boil. When you're ready to serve, you can taste your broth. It shouldn't be salty. It should be like just nicely seasoned before you add everything. If it's too salty, then you can add a little bit more, maybe a touch of water or something like that. Or if it's not salty enough, add a little bit of salt. And then, so I'm going to put this. When you see that like come up to a nice boil, you're almost ready to serve. Then I have shaved fennel that we shaved really thin on a mandolin, and we put it in cold water for a little bit so it gets nice and bouncy. And then I'm just gonna throw that on top. right before you serve with the fennel fronds. And, oops. And some of that fennel pollen on top. So the fennel pollen on top gives it a nice, just aniseed note to it. There you go. And we serve this with the rice and panchan. Very rarely are you just eating one dish in a Korean household. You usually have some kind of kimchi or pickle or like marinated vegetable. So we're gonna serve you 2 panchan on the side, so eat that with it to have the complete Korean experience.
Thank you so much. It makes me hungry. Thank you. So could you wrap up today's program by talking about your wishes and goals for the coming year?
So my personal goal and wishes for our community of Chicago is that we come together, celebrating our diversity, celebrating our stories and our heritage. Let's address these inequities that have been put under the rug for too long. Let's address them together. It takes time. It takes a lot of hard work, but we will all become stronger and better for it, you know, to see change happen. Change doesn't happen without conviction and without some hard work, but I know together we can do it. This is such an amazing city to live in. And so many great people here. Let's use our voices to lift each other up.
Thank you so much. I wish your goal accomplished in soon. And there's in a short time, next week will be the Thanksgiving week. Do you have any wishes for Thanksgiving to audience?
Just very thankful to again to our neighbors and please check in on your neighbors to make sure they're doing okay. And, you know, one person at a time, one block at a time, one neighborhood at a time. I think we can make such a huge impact in a positive way. And just really this year, thankful for life. You know, I mean, living through the pandemic of how many people had lost their lives. I think we need to value life. We need to value the things that we take for granted. And I'm also thankful to the indigenous people and their stories that this land came from. And I am a immigrant to this land. And, you know, we need to acknowledge the history of America, and we need to acknowledge some of the trauma that we've put on many people here, the indigenous people here, and people of color, and I just feel like this Thanksgiving just means so much, not just like a Hallmark kind of holiday anymore. To me, it's like, let's look at America and what it means to be American. And in order to move forward, I think we need to acknowledge the past and read the history of the indigenous people. As an Asian American, I'm relearning my own history, to the Black history and the Latino history, and to like how we all contributed to America and the society, and why we're thankful that we're all here, and our stories, and appreciate our stories, and learn through our traumas and learn through our struggles to be empathetic and to make change for better. And you don't have to be, I wasn't trained to be an activist. I wasn't trained to be a social like leader. I was like the most like shy. I was the last of 4 daughters. I was always talked over, you know, but so it doesn't take a special talent to be an activist. We can all be an activist in our own way. And being grateful for those stories, because they help us grow and help us to learn, you know, and just be curious about be curious about the world and be curious. Through the Chicago Public Library, we have access to all these books and all these stories and into our own histories. And I think that I'm just so grateful for the access to these stories, and let's not take it for granted. And being well read, being well traveled, it contributes to a cultured society. So Chicago, like, I just encourage us to all be thankful for these opportunities to learn and grow.
Thank you so much being with us today. And then, yeah, I believe that audience would enjoy this program a lot, and then they will follow what they heard from you today. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Okay, thank you again being here and then joining us tonight. Thank you again to the CPL Foundation supporters and the Asian American and Pacific Islander Committee for all the wonderful work they do year-round, not only this month, not only for this program. You can find all the details of the One Book, One Chicago programs at the onebook1chicago.org. Thank you again, everyone, for being here, and then have a wonderful night and happy Thanksgiving.